The Royals might have had their best individual day yesterday. What did we think of what went down in that doubleheader? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, we're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get started today. We didn't have an episode yesterday, mainly because my good buddy Braden Turner and I went live with a little bit of a post-game reaction for his podcast of the Ain't No Seats podcast. So if you missed that last night, you can just go over to his Twitter account. I believe it's at bturn23. I want to make sure I get this right so I don't lead anybody down the wrong path. Yeah, bturner23 is where you can go find his Twitter handle or his X handle, whatever you call it, and click on the link that we had last night. Might be doing a few more of those to close out the regular season, maybe even into the postseason, assuming the Royals can get there. But we did an hour and 20 minutes last night, and I just don't think I had enough energy to do another 30 minutes for an episode. So that will kind of count as our episode for yesterday. We're still going to have today, tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday to lead us off into the weekend and a wrap-up of that series in Houston against the Astros. But if you are that first-time listener and you're a new listener, it's Monday through Friday in season. And then in the off-season, probably around December, January, and February, we'll have just 3 episodes a week. But if you're dying for Royals content, you came to the right place. And if you're still riding the high, I'm right there with you. I mean, yesterday, I don't think it is an exaggeration to say the best individual day the Royals have had all season long, considering they sweep Cleveland, pick up 2 games on them. Boston gets swept by Toronto, and Minnesota gets crushed by Atlanta. So you build a game-and-a-half lead over Minnesota in one day. You put yourself a game out of first place, which with a win later on tonight can put you in first place. And if the season ended tonight, which of course it doesn't, you would have the tiebreaker over Cleveland, and you would have the number 2 seed in the American League. Everything about yesterday was really just perfect because it wasn't like the Royals played flawlessly. If that was a part of your answer of, well, it was the perfect day, but they kind of looked sloppy a handful of times, and more than sloppy at that. They played very poor in a couple of innings in game 1 and very poor in a couple of innings in game 2. But the reality is, on the road in a doubleheader, it's not impossible. It's pretty damn hard to sweep a doubleheader, let alone your first place team in the division, your division rival in the Cleveland Guardians. And I understand that Cleveland is on fumes at this point. I still think they're going to have a very good chance to win this division, as do the Royals, as do the Twins. But yesterday made you want to puff out your chest a little bit. And maybe yesterday to you was the final nail. You know, we said for a final nail in the coffin. I don't think that's the right term to use here. But in your belief, your belief system or your hope meter, everything, this was maybe your day in which you finally went all the way and said, I think they're getting to the postseason. I finally believe now, considering there's 30 games left and they have a 6.5 game lead for a playoff spot and their playoff odds are over 90%. Maybe yesterday was the final nail in that, in your hope meter, the optimism, whatever you want to call it. I can't even think of the right term to use, which shows you where my brain's at. I was there a few weeks ago where once Boston really started to slip, I thought this team was good enough to make it the rest of the way. Even with the gauntlet that they had ahead of them, even with games against Cleveland, against Minnesota, it didn't matter to me. I had the belief that they had more in the tank than Boston did. At times, even more than Minnesota did. Because the beauty of this season has not just been the rotation, has not just been Bobby Witt Jr. in his MVP season, Salvador Perez, who we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show, his resurgence, him turning back the clock. It's not just been that. Like 2014, they've had a little bit of luck shine on them. They've had guys overperform. They've stayed, for the most part, pretty healthy. I mean, I'll knock on wood for everybody here, so I'm not the one to jinx it. But there's 30 games left for the Royals, that is. And they've survived a lot of it with their key guys. I mean, I remember we did an episode way, way back in March, and it was our little preview of the season. And a big point of that was, here are the guys that can't get hurt. If these guys get hurt, you can cancel any plans you had for October for the postseason. But to look where they're at now and everything that's happened, everything that's come together, yesterday was that perfect example of just when you think they're down and out, or here comes the collapse, the gauntlet's going to be too much for them, they go out there and sweep a team they've been chasing for the majority of the season. And it's been a really hard place to play in for the Royals for a number of years, and that is Progressive Field. You know, Progressive Field, Jacobs Field, whatever you want to call it. Cleveland's been a nightmare for Kansas City. And this year has been the difference. They are now 6-2 going into tonight's game, which maybe this will lead you right in to that 5:40 first pitch between Michael Lorenzen and Gavin Williams. But tonight they can clinch the season series with 4 more games to go. Be 7-2 against no longer the first place team in your division. You would have first place. You'd be tied technically. So a loss tomorrow would mean that, back down to a game out. But as I said, if the season ended today, you'd have the tiebreaker over Cleveland. And tiebreakers are vitally important, especially at this point late in August. But yesterday, to me, I can't find a better day this season that the Royals had. Not overall performance, just of what happened. I mean, you talk about scoreboard watching. You win game 1 right as Boston loses game 1 of their doubleheader. It was a game that had to be resumed. Kind of a cool story. Danny Jansen, way, way back when that game got banged, he was playing for the Blue Jays, and then we know he got traded to Boston, and he played for Boston in game 1 of the doubleheader, and I think became the first player ever to play for both teams in one game, though there has to be a little asterisk to that. Then they lose in game 2. And Brad Keller blows the game for Boston there. And if that gives you any sort of confidence in how this playoff race is going, say what you want about the Royals bullpen. Boston had to go to Brad Keller in a high leverage spot against Toronto, and he gave up 5 runs in that inning. And that was it. That was the end all be all for the Red Sox against the Blue Jays on Monday night. But the Royals, using Salvador Perez and his 6 RBIs, Daniel Lynch, who we'll talk about here in the next segment, going 3 innings to pick up his first career save. Cole Reagans, leaving with a calf cramp and not looking too good in that game 1 outing, but the bullpen picking him up, right? James MacArthur, MJ Melendez having one hell of a game in game 1. John Schreiber looking as healthy as he has all year long. If you're not buying in now, I don't know what more you need to see. And that goes even if they lose tonight. I mean, they have put themselves in a near perfect spot for this final month of the year. It's not like 2014 where they had to scratch and claw until the final month of final week of the season. It could come down to the final week, and I believe that for the division, it will come down to the final week. But they were always sweating it out every single night in September because of the way that wild card race looked. And that was with one less spot. This year, the Royals have a lot of chances to get in there. And I think what's most impressive, they had to earn it this year. There could be 3 teams, and it's looking like there will be 3 teams, half the postseason side, or half of the postseason bracket on the American League side is from the Central. The league's worst division last year could be sending Kansas City, Minnesota, and Cleveland. But now the focus, for me at least, kind of shifts from, well, just get your foot in the door. And you've heard me say that numerous times. And I'm not going to be disappointed no matter how they get into the postseason, as long as they get there. But now you can shift your focus, at least for the next couple of weeks, to let's win the division. Let's get a first round bye and not worry about a wild card series. Let's await the winner of somebody else. Let's await the winner of New York and Cleveland, or Minnesota and Baltimore, Minnesota and Houston, whoever that would be. Let's await the winner of that. I know New York's got the 1 seed now, so more so it'd be Baltimore against Minnesota and then Cleveland. Or no, it would be Minnesota against Houston. And then if the Royals win tonight, it'd be Cleveland against Baltimore. Why not the first round bye? Why not us? Although, why not them? Because I'm not a part of the team. But this Royals team was really crushing it, cruising, whatever you want to say yesterday. And they'll have an opportunity tonight to move into first place of the American League Central on August 27th. Crazy stuff for Kansas City in 2024. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I got to give my credit to Daniel Lynch because I've been harder on him this year. But last night, he did a job that he absolutely needed to do, and it was a valuable, a well-done job by the left-hander. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor in FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're looking into tonight's game, you might put a little money down on the over total of hits for Bobby Witt Jr. Maybe with Michael Garcia in the lineup, you want to put a little money down on stolen bases, have the over there as well. Or you believe in Michael Lorenzen and you think he's going to go the over for his total number of innings. And you also have football coming up this weekend. So get started today over at FanDuel. I think there's been a few guys this year that I've been a little extra critical of, and I try to refrain from that because it's not really fair at times to criticize somebody who can't defend themselves or just to bash somebody without really backing it up with any stats. And I feel like for the most part, I would back up that criticism with numbers. I wouldn't just say this guy's terrible because I don't like him and he's terrible and he does nothing well. I don't really do that. At least I feel like I don't. If I've done it before, please call me out in the comments because I don't want to be a hypocrite here and point fingers at other people instead of pointing them at myself if I do that. But Daniel Lynch was one of those guys, I believe, that I think you just never really believed in from February to now, or at least until yesterday. That's where he was for me. Even when I would hear good things about Daniel Lynch in Omaha, I had a big enough track record, a big enough sample size in Kansas City to go, he's not the guy. He's not a starter. He's not a big league arm. And I don't know where he's valuable for this team, especially in a playoff push. But things can always change in a long season. And that goes with your optimism meter. We already talked about that in the first segment when I couldn't figure out what the hell to call it. But it's such a long season that you'll fall in love with certain players or certain moments or certain stretches, and you might be overly negative in different ones. Back in May, back in June, I loved what I saw from Angel Serpa. I was choosing to ignore the advanced data on Angel Serpa because I liked the makeup, I liked the high velocity. He was a sinker ball pitcher when he was rolling. He's getting ground ball after ground ball after ground ball. He threw strikes, loved him in the bullpen. You get to a couple weeks ago, Angel Serpa is the most unpitchable guy in the bullpen. Will Smith went through that stretch post-April where his ERA was sub-2, mainly in low leverage innings, and I absolutely jumped the gun on that. I called him the most consistent bullpen arm, yet he's not throwing any high leverage innings. You put him back in high leverage innings, And he pitches so bad that, maybe it was back spasms or lower back tightness, whatever it was that put him on the IL. But that's where we're at with Will Smith. He kind of became the most unpitchable guy in the bullpen and looked far closer to his early season self than he ever did for that chunk of the season in the middle. And Daniel Lynch, the last time we saw him in Kansas City, he got beat up by the Yankees. Now, he said, and I remember we talked about it on the podcast, he wasn't really making excuses, but he was mad about not being used as a starter. There was the Dan Altavilla opener game that didn't go well. He was saying in the postgame, I believe I'm a good starter. I'll do whatever I want or whatever they tell me to do, but I definitely believe I'm good enough to be a starter at this level. And to me, it felt like the end, for Daniel Lynch. At that point in the clubhouse on that night, when we were interviewing him, it didn't really have that feel of, oh, he'll bounce back. It felt like he's going to Omaha right after this. And lo and behold, he goes to Omaha. But he pitched really well when he got back to Omaha. And I ignored it because he had already had his chances twice in Kansas City this year and multiple times before that, and it didn't work out. And I'm not saying last night gave me all the confidence in the world. But at this point in the season, it is about what guys like Daniel Lynch can give you in the final 30 games. If that's all Daniel Lynch gives you for the rest of the year, he did his job. He ate extra outs in a blowout game or a 5-run game. I don't really want to call it a blowout game. But he ate those extra outs and saved the bullpen for tonight. And he secured the save, his first big league save, and the Royals swept that doubleheader. Now, he wasn't pitching in a 1-run game like John Schreiber or Lucas Erceg or Chris Bubich. He wasn't even pitching in a super medium leverage spot, if we want to call it that. I'm just making up words today. But he did his job. And when I look at Alec Marsh and I look at Daniel Lynch and I look at, guys like Sam Long, and Sam Long's been really good this year, but it's just about doing your job. I think a better example is Garrett Hampson last night. If that's the best Garrett Hampson gives you the rest of the way, he at least helped you stack an extra win. It's all about stacking wins at this point, and Daniel Lynch helped that last night. And with the way Will Smith and Angel Serpa were looking over the last few weeks, that's a huge boost. And I didn't expect Daniel Lynch to be in this bullpen in September, but here's where I'm at. If he puts together another good outing or two right before September, I got no need to send him back. If Angel Serpa is burned out, he's on fumes, he's just getting knocked around in Omaha, and Will Smith's not healthy, I have no desire to send Daniel Lynch back. If he's going to look like what he did last night, spin rate was up, velocity was up, I got no complaints whatsoever. Last night, he did his job, plain and simple. And that's where your expectation needs to be. He doesn't need to be the new left-handed specialist. That's Sam Long's job. He doesn't need to be the one-inning left-hander. That's Chris Bubich's job. He needs to be the long reliever. Game's out of control. You're down by 2. You're down by 3. Get a couple of innings, or you're up by 5. Turn things over to Daniel Lynch. And if he throws strikes, he works quickly, he works efficiently like he did last night, I got no issue with him having a spot in this bullpen. You got to get creative in this final month of the season. See where you have value. See if you can craft a bullpen weapon or a hybrid guy going into the postseason. Alec Marsh, to me, can be crafted as that hybrid guy. I honestly liked what I saw from him yesterday. If you want to say that was a bad outing, look at the way that game started. 3 batters into the game, he's down 2-0 because Dairon Blanco can't field the ball in right field and can't make a throw. And he battled around it, and he only gave up 2 more earned runs, and his offense gave him enough. And he settled down, he bared down, and he did his damn job. Daniel Lynch did his damn job. Salvador Perez certainly did his damn job. And we're going to take a quick break and talk about Salvy's greatness, because even at 34 years old, he continues to do it. He continues to come through in the clutch, and he's having, in my opinion, maybe the best season of his career. We'll talk about that after the break, but I do want to thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, Salvador Perez might be having the season of his career. I'm going to tell you why next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. The last shout out we have to give to a sponsor is to SupplyHouse. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades at SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free trade master program. Every trade master gets an access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. Yesterday, at least in Game 2, although Salvador Perez was 3 for 3 in Game 1, Game 2 was the game of the year for him, in my opinion. We've said of the year, of the season a lot in today's episode, but 6 RBIs, if I'm not mistaken, was a career high for him. And his grand slam in that spot at that stage in the game was as Hall of Fame as it gets. I know it's controversial whether he gets in or not, and we're biased here on Locked On Royals, and I know the fan base is biased. Salvador Perez belongs in the Hall of Fame. There are a lot of numbers that would indicate he shouldn't because of WAR and some of the advanced metrics and stuff like that. But if he makes it or he doesn't, I don't think it stains the legacy of what he's been for baseball. Salvador Perez is a gargantuan man. He is a large human being, and he's a catcher. And I remember early on in his career, there was that initial belief of he's kind of like Joe Mauer in the size where once he gets to 35, 36, 37, he'll probably have to be a first baseman because going behind the plate every single day is just going to wear you down, and it might be a problem late in his career with the offensive production. And what was unfortunate for Salvy, unlike Joe Mauer, was that he wasn't great defensively, at least by the advanced metrics. And that's not everything. Salvador Perez has won Gold Gloves before. It was before the time where analytics took over everything and pitch framing and stealing strikes and all of that. I mean, what we saw with the eye test was he was great at blocking and he could throw guys out and he could hit 20 to 25 home runs early on in his career. Then the older he got, that power really started to come around. And he has the near 50 home run season. He had Tommy John. He had the blurriness in his eye. I think when it's all said and done, I'll be left wondering a little bit of, were we missing out on even more greatness? But I also factor in that I think he's really good at 34 because he missed an entire year. And the COVID year gave him like a year and a half off. Probably more than that. It allowed him to rest up a little bit. But I do remember early on in his career, Ned Yost caught him in a lot of games. I mean, he was behind there, I think, one year over 155 times. I mean, he was always catching because Salvy wants to be out there. He has always wanted to play. He really treats it like the children's game. That he looks like he's 12 years old out there and wanting to go out there, catch everybody. He wants to hit. He's smiling. He's celebrating. But to do it at this level, at 34 years old, as a catcher, to be an all-star again, to having over 100 RBIs in the season. He's now just 4 away, I believe. To have probably over 30 home runs. To have the most walks he's had in his career this year. There's more protection in the lineup. But time and time and again, he comes through like he did last night. And Bobby Witt Jr. is the face of this franchise now. But Salvador Perez getting to experience this again, to go through another playoff push, it makes you so appreciative of the fact that they didn't trade him last year, that they didn't punt on the idea that they could be competitive. Because I believe Salvador Perez always wanted to be a Royal. He always wanted to stay his entire career here. And fortunately for him, I mean, 2 years after he debuted, they were in the World Series. So Salvador Perez didn't really go through the struggles team-wise like Alex Gordon did, like Billy Butler did, like Luke Hochevar did. Now, a lot of those guys that were on the 2014 and 15 team, they didn't deal with that pain. But Salvador Perez dealt with the pain post-2015, watching all of his close teammates go elsewhere and play on competitive teams, play with bright future teams. And he stuck it out. And I believe the baseball gods have a way of awarding guys like him. And I think Salvador Perez is one of the easiest guys to root for. And even if you have people out there telling you, no, he's not a Hall of Famer, this and that, I think for the game of baseball, Salvador Perez is absolutely on that Mount Rushmore list of guys that are easy to root for. Because he's getting up there in age now. We know he's not going to play this well forever. But to do it in a year like this, he'll be one of the talking points. If the Royals get to the postseason, which they have a 90+% chance of doing, or maybe it's at 89.8 or whatever the hell it is. But Salvador Perez is going to be one of those talking points because he was coming up with big hits back in 2014 and 2015. Here he is a decade later, putting in my opinion, the best season of his career. I understand stats-wise, his 48 home run season, 120-plus RBI season, I think it was 121 if I'm not mistaken. That was statistically the best year of his career. I believe this is actually the best year of his career because there's been some things he's done a lot better. And these games matter, unlike 2021 or 22, whatever year it was. These games do matter for Salvador Perez and the Royals. And he's having nights like last night in a playoff push. He's had more walks in this season than he has in any other individual season throughout his career. He's gotten better defensively, and oh, by the way, is playing first base too. So he's giving you that flexibility of being a catcher, being a DH, being a first baseman. You can get him in the lineup more. He's hitting for average. He's hitting over 280 right now. He's still hitting for power. He's going to have over 30 home runs. He's driving in runs. He's got one of the best averages with runners in scoring position, as does Bobby, as does Vinny. So all those things combined together, that's why I believe this is the best year of his career. These are better than the numbers he put up in 14 and 15. He's doing this at 34 years old. It's why he's a marvel. It's why he's one of baseball's really anomalies. He's a mystery. I mean, he swings at pitches so far out of the zone, and it leads people to believe, well, just throw sliders way outside and he's not going to hit them. Well, he does. The most famous hit, or one of the most famous hits in Royals franchise history, was like 5 feet out of the zone, and he rips it down the third baseline. If Salvador Perez wasn't a free swinger, he doesn't swing at that, and the Royals maybe go into another inning. Maybe they lose that game. Yeah, it drives you mad at times when he's just hacking at 3 straight pitches, or he's first pitch swinging it at things that aren't even close, and it leads to an out. But he also could have moments like yesterday. It was in game 1 where a pitch was 3 feet above the zone, and he nearly hits it out to dead center. He's got the power. He's got the ability. And people will always wonder, how is he still hitting like this when the metrics don't always support it? He doesn't walk, right? He never hits for, a great average. He's not a high OBP guy. He's a big strikeout and home run guy, but he's still doing it this late in his career. And I had wondered if his end was going to be similar to Yadi's, where Yadier Molina was a non-factor offensively at the very end. I don't know when the fall off will happen for Salvador Perez. It happens for everybody, right? To quote Moneyball, we're all told at some point in time you could no longer play the children's game. And because of his free swinging mentality, it'll probably be a steep drop off. But it's not right now, and I don't think it's going to be next year. And I got no telling if it's the year after that, because I would have thought at this point, after the injuries and being around bad players, bad teams, Salvador Perez would be nearing the end of his career, especially for a catcher. But he's maybe putting in the best year of his career. He's so easy to root for, and he was, in my opinion, the MVP of the doubleheader sweep yesterday. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB Podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, that'll do it for us today. Enjoy the game tonight. We'll have a full breakdown of it tomorrow and Wednesday's games. It's at 12:10 first pitch. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.